So I want to chat about the EU versus the US, not in a geopolitical sense, but in a cultural sense. What seems to be abundantly clear is that humans are not the same all over the world. You and we are influenced by the places that we live. And it's definitely affected me as I've moved from country to country. Now, the two places I'll chat about is the US and the EU, and the kind of cultural seesaw between the two. And I find this, for lack of a better term, friendly rivalry between the two countries to be absolutely fascinating. The US is this new, supposedly bright, shining city on the hill, and Europe is the old, but rich with history. Now, there's no one perfect place to live. There's trade-offs no matter where you want to live in life, but that's the joy of moving from country to country. But I find it fascinating to compare cultural differences between the places that I've lived. And that's going to be the theme for this video, comparing the 20 years that I lived in America to the 15 years I've lived in Europe. God damn, that's a long time. Now, of course, from a 50,000 foot elevation standpoint, human beings like to make fun of one another. Human beings like to pattern recognize and put each other into boxes with stereotypes or generalizations. But those jokes wouldn't be funny unless there was an element of truth to them. So for instance, if I were to tell you that Americans were a peaceful nation that didn't like to meddle in the affairs of other countries, you'd laugh at my sarcasm. I previously made a video about Paris and my experience in it as an American, but this time I kind of want to dive a little bit deeper into the cultural differences. And of course, these are just my observations. If you disagree with me, please let me know in the comments. The first thing that I've noticed as the biggest cultural difference is this element of we're number one in America. Now, of course, Americans are known for their patriotism and love of country. That's no surprise. And enough people in America believe that to be true. And America is massive on its scale. It's got trees, beaches, mountains, islands, plains, and of course a lot of guns. But what you see is a lot of people in America don't even have a passport. Why would you need one? Everything's here. And having grown up in the US, whenever I'd meet someone who had this level of patriotism or this just star-spangled awesomeness when it comes to America, it would piss me off. It was like they were completely blind to seeing the negatives of their own country. This idea of like, we're number one, it's like, I get it. America is number one based off your standards. I mean, sure, the reality of the situation is that the US is a superpower. It is massive. On the flip side, Europeans have this sense of patriotism as well. And of course, there's no one perfect place to live, but also framing it up in that sense of one perfect place to live doesn't work for me. There's pros and cons and trade-offs in whatever country you live in. The quantified measurement of this, the GDP, isn't an accurate measurement of the culture, of the society, of who the people are. It's an Excel spreadsheet of importance. And I mention all this because whenever I travel back to the States, I feel like I enter this bubble that is so self-consuming and surrounded by itself. But this relationship between the US and Europe isn't a two-way channel. It's very much one way, where you have the US culture, media, Hollywood movies, TV shows being pumped out globally. And it's not the inverse. Europeans don't export their culture to the US that much. When you're in the States, unless something bad happens globally, you don't really hear about the rest of the world in the news. This is a massive generalization, but it does ring true. Literally putting my camera on a trash bin right now to get this shot. And I'll be honest, when I was in California, I was geographically isolated from the rest of the world. You had the ocean on one side and the Midwest on the other. And when I'm here in Europe, I'm surrounded by the most multicultural experience I've ever had. You also get news from all over the world. Like, it's more of a blend of cultures, opposed to America, where there would just be news about states, about local news, and it felt very insular. Being here in France, you can't help but notice that Germany is right next to you, Italy's just around the corner, and Spain is further south. Like, you're constantly surrounded by multicultural people. And the criticism of the US that I've heard from Europeans is that there's a lack of culture, that it's a new country. But I don't think that's necessarily true. Most French people, I'll be honest, learned English by watching Friends.
Je m'appelle Claude.
Je te flee.
There is a constant stream of TV news, articles, sports that is exported across the world. So what do Europeans mean when they say that there's a lack of culture? I think what they're alluding to is a more niche, nuanced version of culture, as in, what do you do in your day-to-day life? What does your structure of your life look like? I guess Europeans are sort of talking about the traditions, holidays, cultures, dishes that are passed down from a time before countries were called countries. Of course, America has its own culture. Thanksgiving, Coca-Cola, Christmas, Tex-Mex, barbecue, baseball, and the Star-Spangled Banner, but it feels like it's a homogeneous mix across the entire country. I mean, one thing that I secretly detest about America is its outdoor strip malls. If I have to drive through another one of those one more single time, I'm gonna lose my mind. Now, of course, you couldn't say the same thing about Europe. And in fact, when you're traveling in the States, a 4-hour flight anywhere in America, you're still gonna end up in America. In Europe, you're in a completely different country. Things move faster in the US. There's no doubt about that. And there's definitely less regulation, less hoops to jump through. So if you're thinking of starting a business or a new venture, there is something very attractive about that. Just in the sense of wanting to get your ideas out into the market quickly, America is amazing for that. But also the work ethic in America is relentless. People will work through lunch hour, and you often see people eating a sandwich with one hand and typing with the other. And here in France, the idea of working through lunch is blasphemous in the name of good food. It's almost viewed as unhealthy to even consider working through lunch. Similarly, in the States, the idea of smoking as much as they do in France is utterly reprehensible. Even in my hometown of Santa Barbara, California, they've banned smoking outdoors. Parisians would never get along with that. I mean, the difference between the two work cultures, France and the US, couldn't be more stark. You do not want to work past 62, as you can kind of see here with riots and protests all day long. But here in Paris, I've noticed that Parisians work long hours. Like, they'll work till 8, 9 o'clock at night, but during the day, they're gonna take a lot of smoking breaks, coffee breaks, chatting around the water cooler. That happens 10 or 12 times throughout the day. I noticed that they will blur the lines between work and pleasure, perhaps to keep a more even keel or balance throughout the day. And within that same vein, there is this idea of work having this scholastic schedule to it. And hear me out on this. It feels like the main metric of measuring your productivity at work here is how many hours you stay at work, how late you're burning the midnight oil, so to speak. But even though you're spending a lot of time at work, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're being productive. Hours in the office don't equate to productivity. Now, we've all felt that flow state you get into when you're doing, like, as I call it, deep work, and the hours just fly by. It feels like that's kind of tough to do here if you're taking smoking breaks or coffee breaks, or there's a work culture that incentivizes that. All right, I think they've just opened it up, so I might have to move. Could have definitely picked a more relaxed day to shoot this video, but you know, c'est la vie here in Paris. So whilst America has this hustle culture-like mentality of relentless pursuit, in France, not so much. It's more relaxed. There's a work-life balance. Like, the idea of working on a Sunday here in France, c'est pas possible. And sometimes I want to do that. Sometimes I'd like to, you know, get some stuff done at the weekends. But the French have such a clear line in the sand drawn when it comes to work-life balance. French have mastered the art of taking time off and recharging. So, again, it's this idea of trade-offs, right? If you want to start a business, America is a great place to do that. There's not as many hoops to jump through, and you can move fast. There's something very alluring about that. There's a pace, there's an energetic, frantic energy is associated with the work ethic in America that if you do it for too long, it feels like you will burn out. Inversely, here in France, there's a better work-life balance. The other thing that I love about Paris is the fashion sense. Everybody takes tremendous care of how they present themselves in public. And I couldn't help but notice, but in California, there's much more of a relaxed vibe when it comes to how people present themselves, more of a sport, athletic, leisure. I mean, just look at the people behind me. That guy is rocking a great outfit. Love it. Walking cane. Doesn't even need one. And so because Paris is such a fashion capital of the world, you see a massive emphasis on aesthetics and looking good over here, and I respect that. I appreciate it more than the lack of effort that goes into just throwing on a pair of sweatpants. What I love about these cultural comparisons is that it reminds us to go out there and travel and experience the world. There's a beauty in the fact that there's many ways to live your life. And travel and experience gives you the perspective to decide what you like and what you don't like about certain cultures. That may even inform a big decision to move someplace new. It's always fun to appreciate the cultural contrasts. That's enough from me. Thanks for watching. Chat to you soon. Peace.